Welcome to this class on the planetary aspects and how they affect us. I'm Cayelin Castell, and I'm here to share with you how to understand what the aspects or the relationships are between the planets on any given natal chart or event chart. And by the end of this class, you will know how to determine your own planetary aspects as well as that for anyone else. And this is something that you can see from the imagery here of the man in on the sailing ship looking up into the sky. Is this part of how we learn to navigate? And any navigator must learn some of these technical aspects. So this is a little bit challenging. I realize some of this material isn't as much fun as the more archetypal mythic stories and so on of the material that we share in shamanic astrology. And yet this is also really important to understand and have the basics. So any good navigator had to learn certain things about, you know, what seasons certain stars were rising in, directions, and all kinds of different things about the sky to actually be able to use their trade. And this is the same thing. That's what we're doing here. So the first thing I'd like you to know and really impress upon you is that from the perspective of shamanic astrology, it is archetype driven and not aspect driven. There are some forms of astrology that really focus heavily on the aspects, but we really look more at the relationship and how the planets are talking to each other based on the archetypes that they're in. So yet the aspects are important, and we do find that certain signs, certain modalities and elements will aspect each other in a specific way. So we're looking at those aspects as a way of gaining deeper understanding. The second thing to know is that there are no good or bad aspects. Really, what an aspect is doing is defining a relationship between planets or angles of the chart or the nodes on the chart. And they, you know, any relationship that we look at is an opportunity for growth. When we understand these relationships, we can work with them more consciously. And when we're understanding the aspects, we're also understanding a little more about the archetypes, and that will really determine how these relationships, how these planets, how this information is showing up in our life and how we're experiencing that. So let's just start with the visual aspect. One of the things is that when we look at the sky, the new moon, now actually you don't see an exact new moon as it's defined as when the sun and the moon are conjunct. And when the sun and the moon are conjunct, you can't see the moon because the sun outshines it. However, I found a little crescent moon phase here, so it kind of gives you the sense of that, because it's very shortly after the exact new moon that the moon begins to show some light. And actually, the sun and the moon are still pretty close together. So when the sun and the moon together, it is a conjunction. Any two planets coming together is a conjunction. If there happens to be a planet rising at the time you're born, it is conjunct the ascendant. So conjunctions are when planets come together. Now, the first and last quarter moon, when the moon is half full, is a time when the sun and the moon are at a 90-degree angle to one another. So they are in a square, and it lights up half of the moon. Now, in the first quarter moon, the moon is going to continue to gain in light, and in the last quarter moon, it's going to continue to shrink in light. That all has specific meaning, but I'm just kind of giving you the idea of how we can visually connect with aspects. Now, the full moon is when the sun and the moon are opposite, 180 degrees apart from each other. And basically, that's when the moon rises as the sun sets, or the sun rises as the moon sets. It's a 180 degree aspect. So that's just a little quick look at that. Now, before we jump into this any further, I just want to do a little reminder that we are looking at each archetypal sign as having 30 degrees, and that in 12 signs times 30 degrees per sign, that gives us the 360 degrees of the circle. It could be divided up in different ways, but this is how it's done in the astrological view of the sky. And that was part of what we looked at a little bit when we were looking at the chart as a map. So remember, there are 30 degrees in a sign, and it's also important to remember that there's 60 minutes in a degree. So that gives us a sense of how far into the degree any given planet is. So for example, if we see a planet, say it's the sun or the moon or Venus or Mars, any planet, and currently Uranus is going to be somewhere around as I'm doing this recording, around 13 degrees Aries. So the first number is the degrees, 13 Aries, and the last number is the minutes, 36 minutes. So that lets us know that it's already halfway into that degree. If it was 13 degrees and 2 minutes, it would just had moved into the 13th degree. If it's 13 degrees and 58 minutes, then it's almost ready to go into the next degree. So just understanding that movement can be really helpful. So I'm just going to give you an example from a chart. This chart is showing Venus at 26 degrees Aries and 57 minutes. So hopefully you can see that. Easily, you can see what I'm talking about, but if not, this 26 Aries 57 is showing up here. And then Mercury on this chart is 20 degrees and 55 minutes. So the number with the little circle after it is the degrees, and the number with the little slash is the minutes. So 20 degrees and 55 minutes tells us that we're almost at the next degree. There's only 5 minutes left in this degree before Mercury would be at 21 degrees. And the same here with Venus at 26 Aries 57. In 3 more minutes, it would be showing up at 27 degrees. Now Jupiter here is at 24 Leo and 15 minutes, so it just went into the 24th degree. So that's just something for you to become familiar with. And again, if you have studied the signs and symbols, you'll be able to look at this and recognize the different planets and the signs, and then also looking at the degrees and the minutes of each degree. So let's just talk about the aspects. Now, there are something that in traditional astrology or more mainstream astrology they'll talk about as the major aspects. Sometimes they're also known as the Ptolemaic aspects. Now, Ptolemy, or Claudius Ptolemy, he was I think he was actually a Greek who lived in Egypt, but it was a time of Roman rule. But he was a mathematician, he was an astronomer, an astrologer, he was also a poet, and these are the aspects that are listed here that he felt were the most important. And they basically form the sacred geometry. I will talk a little bit about some of the other aspects just so you know about them, but these are the ones that we look at more closely in shamanic astrology, and I'll tell you about why that is in a moment. So again, a conjunction is when 2 planets are together like a new moon. A sextile is when the moon is about 60 degrees from the sun, or like a crescent moon, and the square is the first and last quarter moon, as we talked about before, because they form a 90-degree angle. I'll show a little bit more about how this works as we go along. And then the trine is the phase of the moon that is the waxing and waning gibbous moon, and that is when the moon is trine the sun, or at a 120-degree angle. And then the opposition is, of course, the full moon, when the moon and the sun are opposite each other. So if we look at these aspects, these are all that I'm showing here are, this is a sextile, 60 degrees, because remember each house is 30 degrees and the next house is 30 degrees. So this is showing 60 degrees. Here's 90 degrees from 0 Aries to 0 Cancer, from 0 Cancer to 0 Libra, from 0 Libra to 0 Capricorn, and from 0 Capricorn to 0 Aries. And you can see that there are 3 houses, or 30 degrees for each house in between each sign. That's the 90-degree angle, so it forms a square. And then we've got a grand trine in water and a grand trine in earth. These are the 120 degrees, so it creates a triangle. And that's the Star of David. Now this isn't, we're not showing planets here. I'm just showing the sacred geometry about what it looks like. If we took every aspect that's possible, every grand cross, every square, every grand trine possible and all the sextiles, then this is what the sacred geometry would look like. Now, of course, you're never going to see a chart that looks like that, but you can see some charts that will have a lot of aspects. But I just thought that was a really amazing, just sort of beautiful thing to look at. Now, here is an example of some major aspects on a chart. Just to kind of give you a sense of this, we're going to back up and go through this piece by piece, but I just want to introduce this piece to you. So here we get, again, we have this chart with Jupiter and Pluto conjunct. They are together. Jupiter's at 24:15 Leo. Pluto's at 26:57 Leo. So they're just slightly over 2 degrees apart. So it's a very close conjunction. We have Jupiter and Pluto opposite Mercury, and again, Mercury at 20 degrees and 55 minutes of Aquarius. And so it's a pretty close opposition. Jupiter's about 4 degrees, almost 5 degrees in opposition to Mercury. And Pluto is almost 7 degrees in opposition to Mercury. So you can see how they are exactly opposite one another. Now, here we have a square. This is Uranus at 28:38 Cancer, and it is square Venus at 26:57, almost 27 degrees. So it's just a little over a degree and a half in terms of their square to each other, so almost an exact 90-degree angle. Now these are all major aspects. Also here we have Jupiter and Pluto trine the moon, and it's within Jupiter's within about a little over 2 degrees in its trine to the moon. Pluto is 26, so about let's see, this is almost 23, so about 3 degrees. So sometimes what we do is we round up when we see the degrees are late. So Pluto here is almost 27, and the moon is almost 23. So actually that would be about a 4-degree difference. And then the moon at 22:47 is trine Venus at 26:57. So if we rounded this to 27 degrees, and we rounded the moon to 23, there's about a 4-degree difference between the moon and Venus. And I'll explain why this is important in just a minute. Okay, so the minor aspects. Now, these are the minor aspects are subdivisions of the major aspects. So the semi-quadrate or the semi-square is a 45-degree angle. One of the things I just want to say is that Shamanic astrology does not use the minor aspects at all. Basically, we can find everything that we need from the chart looking at the dynamic aspects. And that will really give us everything that's about the soul's intent on a natal chart. Some people use the minor aspects because they see for them it helps them refine the information, but from the perspective of Shamanic astrology, not high on the list of priorities when we're looking at a chart. So we don't use them, but I'm just giving you this information so you know about it. So if you hear someone talking about a semi-square or a semi-quadrate, you know that that's a 45-degree angle, and here's the symbol of what that looks like. If you're hearing somebody talk about a sesquiquadrate or a sesquisquare, a 135-degree angle, I'm going to show you what these angles look like in a moment. And again, in a more mundane or traditional look at astrology, these two aspects are considered disharmonious. Now the semi-sextile, or 30-degree, like if something was at 0 Aries and something was at 0 Taurus, they would be exactly 30 degrees apart. And that is considered a neutral aspect or a non-aspect. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the quincunx or inconjunct is a 150-degree angle, also considered neutral, also considered a non-aspect. And then the quintile is 72 degrees, and it's considered harmonious because if you have 5 quintiles, all 72 degrees apart, it will create a star, a 5-pointed star on the chart. So now let's just look at these minor aspects very quickly to get a sense of how they look on the chart. Let's actually back up and get the semi-square. So 45 degrees. So if we start at 0 Pisces here and we went to 15 degrees Aries, that's a 45-degree angle. Or if we went from 0 Capricorn to 15 Scorpio, that's a 45-degree angle. So that would be a semi-square. Now the sesquiquadrate or the sesquisquare is the 135-degree angle. So if we started at 0 Pisces and we went to about 15 degrees of Cancer, that would be 135 degrees. If we started at 0 Sagittarius and we went to 15 degrees Cancer, that would also be 135 degrees. Now, in most of the minor aspects, they do not share an element or a modality. However, occasionally the sesquisquare can, and you can see here from Pisces to Cancer, they're actually in the same element. But from Sagittarius to Cancer, they are not in the same element, and they are also not in the same modality. So now here's the quincunx, or the 150-degree angle. And I meant to have this be a different color, because this is actually the opposition. So let me see if I can change that really quickly. No, I guess not. Anyway, I'm sorry, this was supposed to be red. This is the opposition from Aquarius to Leo. But if we started from Aquarius and we went to Cancer, from 0 Aquarius to 0 Cancer, that's 150 degrees apart. Now the semi-sextile is also showing here as the 30 degrees apart. So from 0 Aquarius to 0 Pisces, 30 degrees. And from 0 Libra to 0 Virgo is also 30 degrees. So any of these would be the semi-sextile. Now the reason that I actually put these on the same page is that they're considered, these are inconjuncts, or they are considered to be aspects that are there's no relationship. Okay, so actually here's the slide that I thought I was going to be showing you. So the from 0 Aquarius to 0 Cancer, and that's the inconjunct 150 degrees. So if you sat in a circle and you look straight ahead and you don't move your eyes, but you just look straight ahead, you can see what is exactly opposite you. And then there's kind of a little bit of a blind spot. So if you were sitting here on the circle and you're looking straight ahead, you would see Leo exactly opposite you. But you would, if you looked out here, you would not see Cancer and you would not see Virgo. It just is not in the field of vision. And the same thing is if you're sitting here at 0 Aquarius and you're looking straight ahead, you can know that something's sitting beside you, but you can't really see it. So that is the opportunity to understand how these particular aspects, these inconjunct aspects, are non-relationships because they don't actually even see each other. And again, they don't share an element or a modality. Now, unless it's a sesquisquare, which of course that can, as I showed you before. So these are the minor aspects. And again, you can take this information and this piece you can just put away. You don't really need to know it or to keep track of it, but it is interesting just to keep in mind in terms of Aquarius does not speak the same language as Pisces, and Aquarius does not speak the same language as Capricorn. Also, Aquarius does not speak the same language as Cancer. So these non-aspects, if people have planets in these signs, then there's a greater alchemy that needs to happen in order for them to be able to talk and understand each other. What we're going to focus on now are the dynamic aspects. And in traditional astrology or more mundane astrology, they would call these the hard aspects, which implies difficult. And we decided to rename it to dynamic aspects because this is where things actually happen. These aspects are the ones that are the catalysts for change. And they are the conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. And so they create a relationship usually between modalities. Now, occasionally it might not be the case, and I'll share a little bit about why that is a little bit later. But for the most part, conjunctions, squares, and oppositions will be in the same modality, and so there is a conversation that can take place because there's a similarity, the mode of operation. The modality is the mode of operation, and if you've forgotten what those are, then you can go back and listen to the class on the the modalities, and also I'll be doing a little review here in a moment. So let's just start by looking at conjunctions, because they are when two planets come together. It's like not necessarily fitting together like pieces of a puzzle, but they're coming together. And they basically, when they come together, it intensifies the energies of the planets. Or if it's on an angle or with a node, it just is amplifying that energy, because they're together in the same archetypal sign, the same energy. So a planet conjunction to a personal planet, so say an outer planet to a personal planet, like Pluto to the Sun, Moon, Venus, Mercury, Mars, or to an angle or node of the chart, or say it's Saturn, or say it's Uranus or Neptune, one of the outer planets that are the initiating planets. They're adding their initiatory energy to that planet, angle, or node. And this is also true for a square opposition. But with a conjunction, it's like, making it bigger, making it more intensified. And basically the intention is that these energies are learning how to work together, how to accomplish or create something in the same modality or in the same element. Actually, only if they're conjunct would they be in the same element, possibly. But bringing the different aspects together, the different energies together, can create ideas and ways of doing things, and it creates new possibilities, is another way to look at that. So I just thought I'd put in a little star map to show a conjunction in the sky. Here's Jupiter and here's the moon together in the sky. This is an image that was happening when Jupiter was in the constellation of the Twins near Castor and Pollux. These signs right here. Procyon is one of the stars of the winter triangle. But here we have the horizon line. This was shortly after, it's right near a very full moon, actually, and Jupiter, moon and Jupiter are conjunct. So they're together in the sky. So that's what it looks like when they're together in the sky. We could also just look on a chart and see if you see, like here's a new moon in Sagittarius where the sun and the moon are both at 13 degrees and 28 minutes of Sagittarius, an exact new moon point. So on a chart, you'll see them together. Now that's a very close conjunction. Now this shows a new moon time when the sun and moon were in Capricorn, almost 11 degrees because they're at 10:57 Capricorn. I think I used this example before. Pluto's at 11:16, so very close, with less than half a degree from each other. And Mercury's at 12:50 Capricorn. So that's a conjunction of 4 planets. Now, Venus is at 26 Capricorn, so it's a little bit further away. And I'll explain in a minute what that means, like what are the orbs, what are the degrees that we look at. So here we also see Saturn conjunct the ascendant within about 7 degrees. And if we look over here, we have Neptune at 3 degrees, Pisces. We have the IC at almost 7 degrees because it's 6:55. And we have Chiron at 9:59, almost 10 degrees. So they are all conjunct because they are within 10 degrees of each other. And I'll explain again a little bit more about that. So we've seen conjunctions, and now what we're going to focus on are the squares and oppositions. The squares again are 90 degrees and the oppositions are 180 degrees. And we're going to look at the different modalities. So here we have 0 Capricorn, 0 Aries, 0 Cancer, 0 Libra, 0 Capricorn. They create the 90-degree squares between each other. And then Capricorn is opposite Cancer, so it creates an opposition. And Aries is opposite Libra, so you can see that it creates a grand cross and a grand square. Here we have the self-interest signs. We have Aquarius, square Taurus, square Leo, square Scorpio, square Aquarius. And the opposite sign from Aquarius is Leo, and the opposite sign from Scorpio is Taurus. And then the last one of these modalities is Pisces square Gemini, square Virgo, square Sagittarius, square Pisces. Pisces is opposite Virgo, Sagittarius is opposite Gemini. Now, for those of you who have not quite mastered this yet, this will be very important. It will be very helpful for you to learn these modalities so that when you look at a chart, you'll be able to quickly see what the relationships are. It takes a little practice, but it's a great tool and a great way to learn it. Now, again, the squares are 90 degrees. So they're like the quarter moons, and they represent the time to decide and take action. So here you can just see what it looks like from the perspective of the householder or the culture bearer signs for the squares. And then here are the oppositions. This one's creating the Grand Cross. And this is more like a full moon time or a time of fruition where the light of awareness, where it may be comfortable and it may not be easy to deal with that illumination that's taking place, but it is, we see these as resonant polarities rather than opposed to each other. They're not opposed. As we could say, Cancer and Capricorn are interested in how do we create a structure that supports family and community. Aries and Libra are interested in how do we create relationship with ourselves and with others. So they are different because Aries is focusing on self and Libra is focusing on other, but they are interested in the relationship aspect. So they share that piece. And all of the householder signs are also sharing the piece about how do we create a way to be safe, to be honored, to be nurtured, to be loved, to be productive and successful in relationships, whether they're our family or our work or how we're doing our tribe and community, that kind of thing. So their modality, their mode of operation is similar, and yet they have a different perspective. So, if you think about Aries having the perspective of looking at self and Libra having the perspective of looking at other, then Libra might get a little irritated with Aries for always being interested in how it's affecting self, and Aries might be irritated with Libra for always being too interested in the other. So the idea is then to come to a balance on that resonant polarity, to find a way to balance where it's healthy expression or experience of self along with a healthy expression and experience of other. Now, let's look at the elemental aspects, and these are what form the trines and sextiles. So again, the major aspects are operating in the modalities, on the squares, conjunctions, and oppositions, and the elemental aspects are the trines and sextiles. A trine is 120 degrees, a sextile is 60 degrees, and these represent the earth, water, fire, and air signs. So I'm just going to quickly take you through the earth signs, and you can see how they create a trine to each other, and the water signs and how they create a trine to each other. And if you put, and then again the sextile, and we've talked about this already, but from 0 Capricorn to 0 Pisces, from an earth sign to a water sign is 60 degrees, and that forms a sextile. If you put all of the planets in sextile to each other, not planets, I mean, if you put all of the signs in, you draw in the sextiles, you will have earth and water. And it would form the grand trine. So that this actually looks like a grand sextile. And in 2013, there was a grand sextile that formed in the sky. There were planets at all of the 6 points of the grand sextile, and it was a pretty remarkable thing to be witness to and to see on a chart. So anybody born at that time would have had a grand sextile. Now, we're going to look at natal aspect orbs. So when we're looking at how to determine what are the natal aspects, what are the relationship between the planets on your own natal chart, we use, as I've mentioned already, a 10-degree orb. That's what we use most. 10 degrees is really easy to figure out. So if something is at 15 Scorpio, then something at 25 Scorpio is going to be conjunct, or at 5 Scorpio. But occasionally we also use a 12 to 15 degree orb, And I'm just going to mention this. I think it's probably best to just practice with the 10 degree because it's easy if you're just practicing. But the reason we use the 10 degree orb is because it has to do with visibility. So for example, if you see the moon within 10 degrees of another planet, they look like they're together. And then, but sometimes they can still look pretty close together at 12 to 15 degrees. Also, the moon does move 12 to 15 degrees a day. And some days it moves faster than others, so so it covers more ground. But you know, it's from one day. If you looked at the sky in the night, and the next night you would see that the moon had moved about 12 to 15 degrees from night to night. Now, planets that are within 10 degrees of the sun are not visible. That's any planet. Now, Mars in particular becomes invisible within 15 degrees from the sun. So that's why, because if it's becoming invisible, it means that it's close enough to the sun that it's considered to be conjunct. So that's why the 15-degree orb can work in some cases. Now we don't, we don't necessarily use it. There are special cases when we do. It becomes kind of more of an intuitive thing. But the thing that you can totally trust is the 10-degree orb. So first, now we're going to go through the different steps to figure out what dynamic aspects you have on your chart that are existing between the natal planets. So the very first step is to know your modalities, and we've been talking about that. Again, those are the householder, culture bearer, cardinal signs. They're also the self-interest or fixed signs, or the in service to spirit and mutable signs. And we just looked at the three crosses that they create, that each modality creates. So, so we understand that they create conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. The next thing to know, so once you know your modalities, which is really helpful, then also helps to know your symbols of the signs and the planets, and so you know what you're looking at when you're looking at a chart. And then use a 10-degree orb on either side of the planet to determine the dynamic aspects. So I'm going to walk you through this step by step. So if we look at, say, for example, a planet, say the sun is at the winter solstice point, and a person is born on that day when the sun is at 0 Capricorn, then it will be conjunct any planet, angle, or node up to 10 degrees Capricorn. But it's also, because it's right at it's just moving into the new sign, it'll also be considered conjunct if there's a planet, angle, or node at 20 degrees Sagittarius. So from 20 degrees Sagittarius to 10 degrees Capricorn, with 0 Capricorn being right in the center of that, that represents the 10-degree orb on either side of that 0 point. So that's why up here it says conjunction is 0 degrees, or 0 degrees between the planets, but there might be 350 degrees on one side, so the example of 20 degrees Sagittarius to 0 Capricorn, or 10 degrees on the other side, so the example of 0 Capricorn and up to 10 degrees Capricorn on the other side. Now, a conjunction can also happen. So say, for example, a planet, say the sun was at 23 Capricorn, and Venus was at 3 Aquarius. They would still be conjunct because they're within 10 degrees, and that would also mean that Venus would not be visible because they're within 10 degrees of each other. So it's really important to be able to kind of figure out these degrees. This might seem a little confusing, and I know I'm going fairly quickly here, but I'm going to give you a chance to practice, and of course this is being recorded so you can go back and listen to it. So for those of you who already know this material, you can keep on moving. For those of you who don't, you might want to back this up and re-listen to the parts that feel a little more confusing. So let's just kind of look at what a square looks like. And that's a 90-degree angle. And so, for example, if a planet was at 15 Scorpio, so right in the middle of the sign of Scorpio, and another planet was at 15 Aquarius, they would be in an exact 90-degree angle, exactly square, exact 90-degree angle. However, if we had a planet, so say we had another planet that was at 5 degrees of Aquarius and 15 in its aspecting, or in square to a planet at 15 degrees Scorpio, they would still be square. We could still draw in the square line. They'd just be a little bit wider. It'd be a little beyond. It would be more like an 80-degree angle. And we can also take it up to 100 degrees. Let me just see. I think of the next example. Nope, I didn't do an example of that, but you kind of get the idea. So basically, oh yeah, so if we had a planet at 25 degrees Aquarius, that's the other side of it. Yeah, yeah. So it would be more of a 100-degree angle between the 15-degree planet at Scorpio and the 25-degree planet at Aquarius. So those are still squares, if that makes sense. So I'm just trying to give you the visual sense of it. And also, I know it feels, sometimes people feel like this is a lot of math. It's really not too hard. And once you get practice with it, it gets really easy. It just takes a little bit of time. And I just also want to stop and take a moment to share here that in thinking this way and looking at things this way, it is really creating new pathways in the brain. And when we're creating new pathways in the brain, it's just like when we were kids and we were learning how to read and we had to practice. We had to practice what the letters looked like and what they sounded like, and then how when you put the letters together with other letters, how it created words. So basically that's what we're doing here. We're taking all these different parts, and I've given you some exercises to practice at each point along the way, and we're beginning to put bigger sentences together now in this practice. And so if it takes, and for me, I was one of those kids who it took me, I was in third grade, well, actually between summer of second grade and third grade before I really learned how to read. And there were lots of reasons for that, but part of it was I just had so much anxiety, and that was created by a teacher who just pressured me a lot. So, if you're finding this a little challenging, and I understand, the thing to know is that you can go back and listen to this as much as you want, take time to practice, and eventually each piece, every time it's kind of like if you're, say you're going through the jungle and you're the first person to go through the jungle, and when you go through that jungle you have to take your machete and you have to chop down the plants that are in the way, and you're creating a pathway through the jungle. And the first time you go through, it's just a lot of work. It's a heck of a lot of work. But then the second time you go through, it's a little bit easier because a lot of the things have already been chopped away. And then the third time you go through, it's even easier. And by the time you've been through 10 or 15 times, it's like it's become this easy pathway, and you don't have to do any more hacking and chopping. It's like becomes familiar and easy. You know the way, and it's just an easy thing to do. So just take a deep breath, and we'll just keep going, and just know that you can learn all this by practice. All right, so here we're looking at how to figure out the dynamic aspects between natal planets when they're not in the same sign. So if they fall outside of the modality. So here's an example. So say the sun is at 26 degrees Libra, right here at the end of Libra. And maybe Pluto is at 4 degrees Scorpio. They're actually still conjunct because they're only 8 degrees apart. But one is in Libra and one is in Scorpio, so they're out of sign. So this is why we need to be able to work with that 8-degree window. We also have another example here. So say the sun is at 6 degrees Gemini and Venus is at 28 degrees Taurus. They're 8 degrees apart, but they're in different signs. Okay? So I hope that is clear, or you get a sense of that, and you may see this on a chart. We're going to look at this a little more as we go through the different charts. Now, squares. So for example, if you had the moon at 22 Cancer and Pluto is at 5 Scorpio, they'd still be at a 90-degree or almost 90-degree square. It's not quite, because from 22 Cancer to 0 Leo is 8 degrees, and 5 Scorpio, actually that's a 13-degree orb. Oops, I guess I would need to change this to 2 Scorpio to make it a 10-degree orb, because 22 Cancer, 8 degrees, and then 2 Scorpio is another 2 degrees. That makes 10 degrees between them. So I hope you can see how we're looking at creating that experience of the 10-degree orb even when they're not in the same sign. All right, so here we go. We're going to look at a square. Here's another way to look at it. So say the sun is at 2 degrees Aries, And Uranus is 8 degrees Gemini. So 2 degrees Aries to 2 degree Cancer would be an exact 90-degree square. But since it's at 28, there's like a 4-degree difference between, to be from that exact 90-degree piece, so that we're in that 10-degree orb. So there it is. There's another square, but it's out of sign. It's an out of sign square. All right, so we're going to look at this with oppositions, the same thing. So, for example, if Venus is at 27 Aries, so right here at the very tail end of Aries, and let's see, and Neptune is at 27 degrees Libra, and this actually should be over just a little bit to be in an exact opposition. It looks like it moved somehow. And then it's an exact opposition. However, if Neptune happens to be at 1 degree Scorpio, so just gone into Scorpio, then it's still an opposition, still a pretty exact opposition. Okay, so we could say that it could be the same thing if we did say a planet was at the late degrees of Taurus. So say it's at maybe 28 degrees of Taurus, and something's in early degrees of Sagittarius. That would also be an opposition. So knowing how the planets are in relationship to each other can really help us in understanding how to figure out what the natal aspects are. So we're going to take a quick review here of the steps. First, know your modalities. Second, use at least a 10-degree orb. That's the easiest to start with, to start practicing with. And then remember that the aspects may fall outside of the modality, and it might be not an Aries to Cancer relationship, but rather an Aries to Gemini relationship. So keeping that in mind when you're looking at your own natal chart. And again, here we have, I showed this chart before, of the planets when they are conjunct. So we have the Sun, Moon, Mercury, and Pluto all lined up here in Capricorn, all very closely conjunct. But from 12 Capricorn to 26 Capricorn, from Mercury to Venus, we have 14 degrees, or almost 14 degrees. It's maybe 13 degrees. So it's if we were using the larger orb, and I probably would, because we're creating this energy of all this Capricorn, I would probably include Venus in this lineup of planets in Capricorn. But again, that's something that you use your own intuition on to see if that's something that's really working. And one of the ways that you can do that is by asking questions. So is Pluto affecting that Venus? You can ask people questions about their life. And when we get to the class that has to do with the planetary the outer planet aspects and how they're affecting these planets, they become the initiators, you'll understand maybe what questions to ask. But that's the idea. So again, we have Saturn on the ascendant within 7 degrees, and we have Neptune within 3 degrees, a little more than 3 degrees of the IC, and Chiron about 3 degrees, almost exactly 3 degrees to the IC, so aspecting that angle. Now, again, so that's how we look at conjunctions, and you might want to take time to take the chart that you drew up by hand and go and circle or underline the place where all the conjunctions are happening in your chart. And I recommend that you pause this recording and take a little time to do that now. I know that I might have the best of intentions and would do it later and just keep going, but then I have also found that I don't necessarily get back to it later. So really highly recommend that you take the time to do this piece now and take a pause, and then we'll move on to the next part. Okay, so now we're going to start drawing in the squares on a chart. So for example, if you see that the sun is at 6 degrees and 30 minutes of Sagittarius, and you see the moon is at 6 degrees and 26 minutes of Virgo, that's a pretty exact square. So you'd definitely be wanting to draw that in. So you can use the center ring and draw it in there, or you can draw it from planet to planet. When I first started doing this, I found that it really helped to draw it from planet to planet. And of course, Sagittarius is in service to spirit, Virgo's in service to spirit. You can see that there are 3 30 degrees here, 30 degrees here, almost 30 degrees here. So basically, we're looking at that 90-degree angle. And you're going to, if you have that ability to spot the signs that are in relationship to each other, like Virgo, Sagittarius, Gemini, and Pisces, then you look on the chart and you're going to look for any planet. So like say you start with your sun and you're going to look for any planet. So maybe you might see that there's the sun is in Sagittarius and the moon is in Pisces, or the moon is in or Jupiter is in Pisces, and then they would be in square to each other. Or you look across the chart and you see that Jupiter's in Gemini or Mars is in Gemini, so they are opposite the sun. So we'll look at that a little bit more as we go along. Here's another example of a sun-moon square where the sun is at 14 Pisces, in service to spirit sign, and the moon is in Sagittarius. Now the moon at 14, well, we could say, let's start from 22, almost 23 Sagittarius. So from 23 Sagittarius to 23 Aquarius is 30 degrees, to 23 Pisces, I'm sorry, 23 Capricorn to 23 Aquarius is 60 degrees, and then you add 14 to that, you've got 84 degrees. Well, not quite 14, actually, to 23, you'd add 7, that would give you 67, and then you add the 14. So it's basically a wide square. It's not a really super close square, but the number of degrees, well, actually it's 81.5 degrees apart from this moon in Sagittarius to this Venus, this sun in Pisces. So you can kind of eyeball it. I usually just eyeball it, but to try to get a sense of it. But I've been doing this for a long time, so if you need to do the exact counting, then it actually is a good practice to do that. All right, now let's look at another square we've already seen this one, Uranus at 28 Cancer 38 and Venus at 2657 Aries. And so if we look at Venus at 27 and Uranus at 28.5, there's about 1.5 degrees between the two, just slightly over that. So it's a pretty close square. Definitely something we would consider as a square. Now here's something that's just beyond really the 10-degree orb. So Saturn is at almost 3 degrees Sagittarius, and the sun is in Pisces at 14.5, just slightly over 14.5 degrees of Pisces. And so that gives us 11.5 degrees to the sun. Now this is my chart, and this is Saturn affecting my chart. And I can tell you that in my life experience, I very much had a Saturn experience in my life, Saturn to the sun. When any planet affects the sun, it's like it affects every part of your life because the sun shines on everything. So the sun shines on your personal life, your work life, your relationship life, your creative life. Everything that you do is the sun is shining on that. And so when there's an outer planet to that, it definitely affects every part of your life. Okay, so then we're going to look at oppositions in the same modality. We have Jupiter and Pluto here in Leo. We've seen this one already, opposite Mercury in Aquarius. And it's a pretty close opposition. If we look at Mercury, say it's 20, we just say it's 21 degrees, just round it up. It's so close to 21. And Jupiter's at 24, so that's like a 3-degree difference. It's a 183-degree opposition. And then Pluto's at 26, almost 27. So 21 to 27 is a 186-degree opposition. So very close opposition that's happening here between these planets. So basically we can just see that it's definitely within that 10-degree orb. Now here's an opposition that's out of sign or in a different modality. Venus at almost 27 Aries opposite Neptune at 0 degrees and 8 minutes of Scorpio. So it's not even 1 degree. It's like there's about a 3 degree difference here. So that's a very close opposition. So we could say it's another one that has 183 degrees, and so it's within the 10-degree orb. Now, if Neptune had been, was in Libra, it would have been in the same modality. But Scorpio is self-interest, and Aries is householder or culture bearer. So they're in different modalities. So we'd say that is like an out of sign opposition or out of modality. So they're not having the conversation of the modality. So you want to go. So what we can do is say, maybe you want to stop and pause and draw in your squares and oppositions, looking for, if you want to just take time to do the squares first and then do the oppositions, or if you want to do them together. Some people can spot it really easily. It's pretty easy for them. Other people, it takes a little bit more time for them to figure it out. So I recommend pausing the recording and taking some time to just draw in, and I use red because I feel like that's the dynamic energy to show the squares, oppositions, and conjunctions. So circling your conjunctions and drawing in your squares and oppositions in red is a great way to be able to see it very quickly. Okay, so once you've done that, here we are. I'm showing you a couple of squares. This is my chart again. So there's a square from Uranus to Venus in the same modality, both in householder signs, Aries and Cancer. And here's a square from Uranus to Neptune, but out of their modality. And actually, they're in the same element because Cancer and Scorpio is a water sign, but they're out of their modality. Uranus being, again, culture bearer, householder, and Neptune being self-interest. Now, here's the sun square the moon, and that's a closer square. Obviously, you can see that it's a closer square. And then the sun square Saturn, but all in the same modality. And it definitely is a square to the Saturn works. It's definitely has been a factor in my life. All right, so then finding the oppositions, you can draw them in and, taking time to draw them in. And when you get done with drawing in all your squares and oppositions, depending on how many aspects you have, I happen to have a lot, so it looks like this. And for a long time, when I first started doing readings for people, because the main thing that we interpret in terms of planetary aspects are the squares, oppositions, and conjunctions, that was all I would draw in on their chart. But here's what, but we don't want to just necessarily leave it there. And especially when you're drawing up your own chart. And even maybe if you're drawing up a client's chart, you might want to be able to see what the trines and sextiles are. So I'm going to walk you through that piece as well. So, of course, trines are within, this is showing trines within the elements and one outside of the element. So Pluto is at 2657 Leo, exactly trine Venus at 2657 Aries. Of course, you're going to get really familiar with my chart when we're done with this. And then Venus is trine the moon, and these are all fire signs. So this is a grand trine in fire. And actually, Jupiter's also here, but just to keep it simple, I just put in Pluto. And so we're looking at a very tight grand trine. But Mars is in the early degrees of Capricorn. So it's actually almost 23 degrees. This is just like an 11-degree separation here, so they're almost conjunct. And if you looked at them in the sky when I was born, you would have seen, of course, they were below the horizon, but that's a whole other story. But if you had waited a few hours, you would have seen them somewhat closer together. So they would have still seemed to be conjunct one another. And then, of course, from 27 Aries to 3 Capricorn is only a 6-degree separation, so that's definitely a trine. And from 27 Leo to 3 Capricorn is about it's about 3.5 degrees separation from all of these. So very much in that trine energy, but not in the element, because this is an earth element and this is a fire trine. So what's interesting about this is it does give some groundedness to having Mars and Capricorn in that grand trine. So there's ways of finding the trines on your chart and drawing them in. You can take, I use blue because I feel like blue represents the trine energy, and it's a little softer, a little less dynamic. Something that I have understood about, like say a grand trine, is that it's considered to be a blessing. And people really look forward to having them, or some astrologers just be like, "Oh, that's so great! You have this grand trine." But when you look at the rest of my chart, you'll see that there's lots of squares and oppositions that come with that, which is also a good thing because the energy in the trine doesn't necessarily move very much. And what I mean by that is that when a planet is trine the sun, it's always just gone retrograde or about to station direct. And whenever a planet is near the station point, it's not moving in the sky. And so trine energy isn't very active. It's like this gift, but it only means something if you actually use it. If you stuff it in your closet and you never look at it, then it's just like, what's the point? So finding in and drawing your trines. Actually, if I draw in all the trines on my chart, this is what it looks like. If you want to print off other charts and of your charts and draw in just the trines, I think this is a great practice. Draw in just the squares, draw in just the oppositions, draw in just the trines, and then also at the sextiles. So here, interestingly, there's an out of sign sextile because Pluto is almost in Libra. Actually, yeah, it's almost in Virgo. I'm sorry, it's almost in Virgo. So from Earth to water is a sextile. But Pluto is in fire, and it's sextiling Neptune in a water sign. And then Neptune in water is sextiling Mars in Earth. And the moon in fire is sextiling Mercury in air, and Mercury in air is sextiling Venus in fire. So those are the sextiles, drawing those in. I use green for a sextile, and because I don't know, I've just been doing it that way for a long time, so it just kind of works. And so if you draw, and then if you're drawing in the trines, the sextiles, all the different aspects, well, there's the sextiles, there's the trines and the squares and oppositions together. And then if you add in the sextiles, it creates this whole kind of thing, and you see a little sacred geometry forming. Now, not everybody's chart's going to look like this. Some people have more planets on one side of the chart than the other side. Actually, my chart happens to be one that looks like somebody took the planets and threw them on there. And I did not go into the what the different things are called. We did talk about the quadrants, but if you have all the planets in one quadrant, or if you have a few planets in one quadrant and one planet opposite that, or that kind of thing. So everybody's going to have a little bit different looking chart. I just wanted to give you an example of what the chart looks like when it's all drawn up. So I would take some time and maybe pause the recording, and you can connect into what it is that your chart is and drawing in your aspects. And if you can just print out your blank chart and make as many copies of that as you want and play with it as much as you want. You can do other people's charts. It's a really great practice. And in fact, you might even practice drawing up a chart. If you can print out your own charts, you can then just draw the lines in directly on the chart like I've done here, or you can write them in. It's a good practice. It's a really great way to begin to know your chart, and to I pretty much know the sign and degree of every planet on my own chart because I have worked with this so much. So you can pause the recording and come back. I have another exercise for you when you're done with that part. Okay, so now if you take a minute, you can use this as another way to find your planetary complex is this blank chart. And basically the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, all of these planets, you could write in the sign and degree of each of them, ascendant, midheaven. You can write them in, and then you can write in the modality. So for example, I have Sun in Pisces, so the modality is in service to spirit. I put ISS, it's a short form, and it's in water. The moon is in Sagittarius, that's also in service to spirit, and it's in fire. And so once you've got all these written in, then over here you can write in your planetary complexes. So I'll just show you an example of how I've done that. Here I have my Sun at 14 Pisces in 39 minutes. It's in service to spirit. It's a water sign. My Venus is at 2657 Aries in a householder sign, and it's a fire sign. And I have Uranus at 28 Cancer 38. It's also householder. I forgot to put that in. and it is a water sign. So so if we see that we've got two householder signs, actually this is, as I showed you before, Mars and Venus are trining each other because even though they're both in householder signs, Mars is just moved into Capricorn, so it's in that 120-degree relationship to Venus. But we're not looking so much, but we're looking for the dynamic aspects here on this chart, looking for the dynamic aspects, not the trines and sextiles. So I would write in my planetary complexes that I have Venus square Uranus, and you can use the symbols. I often do that, but sometimes it's easier if people just write it out, especially when they're first learning how to do this. And so here I did it where I just put in the aspects. So I filled in all of the degrees of every aspect of my chart. It's a great way to practice and get familiar with what your chart is, writing in all the modalities, writing in all the elements, what they are, and then looking for the okay, I have in service to spirit, the Sun and the Moon are actually square, but we're going to look, in this one, we're really looking for the outer planet. So we're going to start with Jupiter and see what Jupiter might be aspecting. And of course, I have Jupiter opposite Mercury and Pluto. I didn't really write that in correctly, but sorry about that. And then I have Saturn square Pluto, and I actually have it square the Sun as well. And I have Uranus square Neptune and Venus. It should be in here, but I have Venus up here is where I have it on the personal planets. I have Venus square Uranus and opposite Neptune. So you can, oh yes, this is what I was doing. So the personal planets I put in the aspects from the outer planets, and then outer planets to outer planets, I did include those here because I do have, like say Pluto is conjunct Jupiter. I do have Neptune square Uranus. I do have Uranus square Neptune. Of course they're going to be opposite thing, and Saturn is square Pluto. So actually on my Pluto here, I should have Saturn square Pluto as a, Saturn square, Pluto is square Saturn, so I should have written square Saturn here as well. So I missed that piece. Anyway, and then in the angles, I do have, on the midheaven, I do have Jupiter and Pluto conjunct the midheaven. And so I have written in those angles. You can also add in the descendant and the IC, and for some reason I didn't do that. Actually, if I looked at the midheaven, opposite the midheaven would be Mercury, because it's conjunct the IC. So I might actually go back and fix this handout so that you can have the other angles included in it. For some reason, I don't know why they're not here on this one, because I think when I did this before, I did have the IC and the descendant included, because it's important to also be able to note what are the aspects to the angles of the chart, and also need to put in the nodes as well. So I don't have planets. Oh yes, I do have planets to the nodes. Never mind. So that'll be a piece I'll fix, and I will maybe I'll create a little addendum to that. But you can work on this to play with this part. So now I would like to take you through a process to see if we can make this a little easier, or just another way to do it for those who might find working with a chart or a table a little easier to figure out what dynamic aspects you have on your chart. So let's just back up and re-look at the dynamic aspects. Again, they are the conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. Conjunctions are when two planets are together, like a new moon, and a conjunction intensifies the energy of the planets or angles or actually nodes if the nodes are involved. And we look at the conjunctions of the nodes with planets within a 15-degree orb. And the reason is because we don't really look so much at the squares to the nodes as we do the conjunctions to the nodes. So we use a little wider orb. And the reason we don't look at the squares is because the nodes are really the place where the moon is crossing north and south of the ecliptic. So it doesn't really have anything to do with a planet, but it's a point in space. And that point in space shifts. And over about 18 and a half years, the nodes will come back to a starting place, so they're not moving very quickly. The same thing for the angles of the chart. We don't look at the squares so much as we look at the conjunctions, and that's because the angles of the chart are actually changing every 4 minutes, and it has to do with how the Earth is turning in space. So we tend to look more at the conjunctions, and the squares are like first and last quarter moons. So when we see that half full moon, either in the evening sky or the morning sky, and it represents a time to decide and take action. Actually, sometimes referred to as the crisis in action. Crisis, the original meaning of the word crisis was to decide, and it usually meant that there was a challenge in deciding what course of action to take. So maybe two things that have a lot of things that would be beneficial, but also maybe some challenges. And it's a challenge to figure out which one to take action on. Sometimes we have decisions to make, and it's pretty clear and pretty easy to make those decisions. But usually in the square, it's a time to decide on something and take action, and it's not always an easy choice. In oppositions, it's like a full moon point when the moon is opposite the sun. And the full moon point is a time of fruition when the fullest light of the moon is available. And so the light of awareness is what happens when planets are in opposition to each other. They're looking at each other squarely. They're very aware of one another. It may not feel comfortable. It may not be easy to deal with the awareness, but that is what the opposition looks like. And it doesn't mean they're opposed to each other. They may just have a different point of view and a different way of looking at things. And so it's an interesting challenge to bring the opposition, the energies of the opposition into something that can be workable. So again, the dynamic aspects create dynamic tension and energy, and are the aspects that we can look at on a person's chart to get a really clear idea of what some of the opportunities are. We look at them, challenges as opportunities, and blessings ultimately. Okay, so looking at this chart that I created for you, actually the name of the chart is Determining Aspects on a Natal Chart. I changed the name. And this is a way to get a sense of how many conjunctions, squares, and oppositions you have on your own natal chart. Or if you use this, you can to figure out how many are on another person's chart. So I've listed the natal planets in order here, and I will explain a little bit in a moment why these planets in the middle are in a darker gray zone, because there's a reason for that. But the first thing you want to do is fill in the natal planets, the sign and degree for the natal planets. This is great practice for people who are getting familiar, and a way to, once again, just write in and get a sense of what your own planetary energies are and what degrees they're at. But then you might want to go back and look at a chart. So we're going to start with conjunctions. And we looked at this chart a little earlier. It was the new moon chart. You can see the sun and the moon here together with Pluto and Mercury, and they're all very tight, 12, 11, 10 degrees. They're very close together, so they're all conjunct. Now, Venus is about 14 degrees away from Mercury, and if we're using sometimes a 15-degree orb, we might include Venus in that. But for now, we're just looking at the 10-degree orb, so we won't include Venus in this moment. That's something to consider or to think about. It just is also, you could get a sense of if you're talking to this person, if it really feels like all these planets are working together. My sense is they would be. Now, the ascendant here has Saturn on it. So it's within 7 degrees of the ascendant. Saturn's within 7 degrees of the ascendant. So that is a conjunction to the ascendant. We have the IC with Neptune at 3 and IC at 6, almost 7 degrees, and Chiron at 9, almost 10 degrees. So these two planets, Neptune and Chiron, are conjunct the IC. And those are the only conjunctions you see on this chart. Now, if we look at the chart that we've been using, my chart all along, we can see, again, go just back and looking at the conjunctions of the chart. So if you have your chart, just a printed up chart, you might just, again, go back and look and see where the conjunctions are. So you can write them in on the chart, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But first, let's just look here, because this will help make sense. We've got the midheaven conjunct Jupiter and Pluto. We've got Saturn conjunct the north node. It's within 10 degrees, and the north node with the moon about 10 degrees. And again, with the nodes, we look at up to a 15-degree orb for a conjunction. So the north node is sitting right here between Saturn and the moon. And then Mercury is with the IC of the chart. And those are the only conjunctions that are on this chart. So if we go to fill that in, we would put Mercury, we would write in the IC under conjunctions. We would write the north node, Saturn and the moon, and we'd write the midheaven, we'd write Jupiter and Pluto. Now, in this dark gray section, these are the outer planets. And so we're going to primarily write planetary conjunctions just one time. We don't want to write them twice. So we wouldn't put necessarily Jupiter and Pluto in here twice, but actually Pluto is conjunct Jupiter. So we can write that in and up here, but we wouldn't write it again where Pluto is. We wouldn't write Jupiter in there because that would be putting it in twice. So, this will count as as two conjunctions because Jupiter is conjunct the midheaven and Pluto is conjunct the midheaven. And then Jupiter and Pluto are conjunct each other. So really, if we look at that, there are 3 conjunctions that are taking place there. And then I already talked about Saturn and the moon. So take a minute, pause the recording, and then fill in, look at what your conjunctions are and fill in on your chart how many conjunctions you find. And when you're done, then we'll take a look at the squares. So here we are looking at the squares. Now this is a chart with a lot of squares. You might not see this many squares on a person's chart. You may see 1 or 2. You might not see any. Occasionally that can happen. But you know, this is definitely a lot of squares. We've got Jupiter and Pluto square Saturn. We've got Uranus square Neptune. We've got Uranus square Venus. We've got Neptune square Chiron, Saturn square the Sun, and Saturn square the Moon. And we talked about this earlier, so I won't go into all the details of that, but you get that, you can see how those planets are squaring one another. Now, again, the Uranus square to Neptune isn't in the same modality, and neither is the Jupiter Pluto square to Saturn, not in the same modality, but they're close to that, more closely aligned to that 90-degree angle. So let's now look at how we would write the squares on the chart. So we would take the Sun and write in its square Saturn. And just for simplicity, I took the Moon and wrote the Sun here instead of writing the Moon up here. You could write the Moon and Saturn up here and then not write anything here with the Moon because you don't want to put it in twice. You're only going to put it in once. Venus is square Uranus, and Saturn is square Jupiter and Pluto, and Uranus is square Neptune. So again, you're only going to put these in once, and that is showing all the different squares that are happening on this chart. So again, take a moment, pause the recording, look for your squares, and write them into your chart. And then we'll go on to the oppositions. So here we are looking at the oppositions. We've got Jupiter and Pluto opposite Mercury,
and we've got Neptune opposite Venus. So we've got three oppositions that are showing up on this chart. And if we write them down, we would put Mercury opposite Jupiter and Pluto, and we'd write Venus opposite Neptune. So here you can see a case where there's not so many aspects as we've seen in the previous two with this particular chart. Now the chart you may be working with, maybe you have just one conjunction and two squares and maybe 4 or 5 oppositions. It will all show up differently, or maybe there's not that many of any of those kind of aspects. I've actually seen charts where there's hardly any of these dynamic aspects at all, and that really gives you some information. So now let's just go and finish this last piece. After you've paused this recording and written in your oppositions, then we're going to look at how to figure out how many you have of each of them. So we've got, with the conjunctions, we've got the IC with Mercury, Pluto and Jupiter, Saturn and the Moon with the North Node, and Jupiter and Pluto with the midheaven. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 conjunctions that we would write as our total. And then when we look at the squares, we would look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you count each planet that you've written in. Hopefully you've only written it in once, and you would come up here with 7 squares. And then with the oppositions, there's 1, 2, 3 oppositions. So in terms of dynamic aspects, this chart has 16 dynamic aspects. That's quite a lot of dynamic aspects. If you see a chart with 4 or 5, that's actually quite a number of dynamic aspects for a person to be dealing with. And what we know is that if we see a lot of dynamic aspects on a chart, that person has probably been through a lot of experiences in their life that are encouraging them to go through growth experiences, challenges, and things for them to encounter in their life. Dynamic, what do I want to say? Dynamic actions or things that happen to them. Oftentimes when you see a chart with a lot of aspects on it like this, we could say those are the make it or break it charts, the ones where they have really taken on a lot of challenges in order to have the maximum experience of their soul's growth. So just by knowing these aspects, we can kind of figure out a lot. We don't even have to look at what exactly the aspects are. We can just know that there's probably some challenges that that person is experiencing. So when we go to the next recording, I'm going to re-look at some of the aspect patterns because we just touched on them in this class, and then I'm also going to share with you how to read an ephemeris. And when we get to the reading of an ephemeris, you'll really need to know the symbols. So if you haven't learned the symbols, you might want to go back and again refamiliarize yourself with the symbols, because when we look at the ephemeris, it's all done in symbols, and knowing the symbols will help you. The symbols for the signs, the symbols for the planets, and also the symbols for the aspects can be helpful in reading the ephemeris. So just a reminder that you can get a free natal chart if you want to look up friends, family, co-workers, relationships, and to get a sense of how many aspects they have, what modalities they have, what elements they have, all the things that we've been looking at in these classes so far. And if you go to alab.com, you can go to /free chart, or you can just go to alab.com and click on the link where it says free chart, and you can get the charts, and then you can fill in the blank chart. You can just print out another blank chart, fill it in, and do the work to figure out what these are, and practice this. I think practicing this will help you a lot, especially for those who are just now really learning how to work with these aspects, with looking at the chart, looking at the wheel of the chart and the planets on the chart, and memorizing the symbols will help you so much. So I'll look forward to connecting with you in the next class.